We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Because of the size he was and how fast, like the speed he got up to, he almost needed, it's like he needed all that extra runway just to decelerate from what he had just done to the Seahawks.
It's November 87, LA Raiders at the Seattle Seahawks. This is Remember That Game, the podcast about sporting events that take you on a journey and maybe chart the path of the zeitgeist. I'm your host, Thomas Emerick, and my guest is Ray Delahanty, whose YouTube channel CityNerd explores urbanism and features some great videos on how sporting venues fit their city. Some say Seattle's Old Kingdom visually resembled a tomb, but the building felt alive on ABC's Monday Night Football with Seattle in the AFC driver's seat as Bo Jackson's debut tour rode into town. Ray, did this bring you back to a place and time with your plucky Seattle sports teams and their great throwbacks hosting your perennial Western overlords from Los Angeles?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Seattle, and still to this day, even though I haven't lived there for a couple decades, I'm primarily a Seattle sports fan. And at the time, your fandom kind of revolved somewhat around rivalries, particularly with Los Angeles-based teams, either the Lakers relative to how the Sonics were doing, or in this era, I think the Raiders were kind of the key rival for the Seahawks.
LA had the winningest franchises of the previous 10 years in the Raiders and Lakers as far as titles in their respective league. But here in late 87, did it feel like an ascendant time in Seattle as a city and a sports town? And how much did the shadow of LA loom?
Yeah, I don't know if it felt ascendant overall. I mean, I was a lifelong Sonics fan, and I still would be if they hadn't moved to Oklahoma City. And the Sonics were certainly not ascendant in the mid to late 90s, although they were going to get there, or the mid to late 80s. The Seahawks, on the other hand, ever since the inception of the team in 77, I think they really sold out basically every game at the Kingdome. And even though they weren't very good at the beginning, people still embraced them and supported them. Maybe because, it's a little bit of a football town just because of the University of Washington Huskies play in the city of Seattle. And so people had a taste for football already, but the Seahawks started actually becoming competent in 1983, I think, when they finally broke through, and they went back the next year. They had at least average or better teams for most of the mid 80s. And so it did feel like maybe we were going to get the upper hand, at least on the Raiders, if not on the Broncos, where John Elway was really putting his mark on that team. At least we could maybe get the upper hand on the Raiders. That's kind of the way the Seattle sports landscape felt at that point.
They actually do edge the Raiders in the 84 wild card, but Raiders overwhelmed Seattle in the 83 AFC title at LA Memorial Coliseum, built downtown in the 1920s, back when LA had more urbanist flair. How does the Raiders' home from 82 to 94 there compare on urbanism to the new home of pro football in Los Angeles with SoFi?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like Memorial Coliseum. Just got a long history of hosting Olympics, and kind of, well, maybe not that famously, but the Dodgers first played there when they moved to LA. So like the pictures, I don't know how much video there is, but the pictures you see of like what they had to do to the configuration of Memorial Coliseum to make it useful for baseball are pretty incredible. I believe the left field fence that they erected kind of puts the Fenway Park Green Monster to shame. But as far as the setting, it's kind of like a exposition park campus, so it's not really nestled into a street grid the way even like whatever they're calling Staples Center these days is. So Los Angeles has in some ways kind of improved their approach to citing sports arenas, but I do not love the setup of SoFi Stadium right now. I believe at some point they will connect their growing rail network close to SoFi, but it's not there yet, and so it's kind of like the way LA has always been, where you really have to drive to go wherever you're going to go, and so going to see the Rams or the Chargers at this point is no different.
They want to get that rail exit within like 20 minutes, right?
Yeah, that's right.
On this Monday night, we're at the Kingdome in Seattle when Gifford, Michaels, and Deerdorf bring us in. Can hear it and feel that energy as if Seattle's been railgating. The energy for building passenger rail would lag a bit, but start getting toward there eventually in Seattle. Raiders fly in on a 7-game losing streak. Started 2-0 before the strike, replacement players, and then the season eventually got away, but they're coached by Tom Flores, 2-time Super Bowl champ with the Raiders. They got their Hall of Famers back from strike, and Howie Long, James Lofton, Mike Haynes, Marcus Allen, who tonight is joined in the backfield by his Tecmo Bowl teammate Bo Jackson in two back sets. Just that month, Bo finally made his way over, not from the picket lines, but from the Kansas City Royals for his first NFL snap. Brian Bosworth had some stuff to say about it. Seahawks coach Chuck Knox said pregame that the Raiders have the best 3-7 team he's ever seen. And thanks to Bo, all the hype's with LA again. Ray, how eager were you to see Seattle make a statement?
Yeah. So, again, this is coming off probably kind of like a 4-season stretch where, Chuck Knox was at the helm. People felt good about that. They loved, Kurt Warner in the backfield and Steve Largent out wide. They had grown, everybody had grown to embrace Dave Craig at quarterback. So they had kind of this core that had kind of Cinderella success in 83 and 84 a little bit. Some mixed results against the Raiders, but you did feel like coming into this game, and it was a weird season because of the strike, but they were 7-3, I think, coming into this game. I can't remember if they were in first at this time. I know John Elway would win the MVP this year, I think. And so the Broncos are very good, but the Seahawks were looking good for possibly winning the division, or at least getting a wild card spot and going back to the playoffs, which they'd missed the previous 2 years, even though they were 500, or I think they had a 10-6 season or an 8-8 season. So the place was going to be rocking. And not only that, but despite the strike, we felt like we had a team. We had the core, and then we had this new addition, Brian Bosworth, in the middle of the linebacking core. He was going to be the centerpiece that really kind of put us over the top. Maybe we can get back to being 12-4, 13-3, something like that. But that was the feeling going into that game. Is we're gonna put our stamp on this one. We're gonna take care of the Raiders, and we're gonna see how we can finish this season.
AFC West, Chargers, aging Dan Fouts at 8-3. Apparently they made some hay in the replacement player weeks, and Broncos were at 7-3-1. And we're coming into Monday night here. So 8-3 would put Seattle in the driver's seat, but a razor's edge. A good start for them as 9-point home favorites. Dave Craig has a glow up compared to the 83 AFC title when he fell apart against LA. Production crew had no respect for the guy, introduced him as a relative unknown, and the production photo for their quarterback looked like it was a still from a home movie, got the ball cap shade over his eyes. That broadcast, otherwise delightful, Dick Enberg and Merlin Olsen at LA Coliseum with the Olympic Gateway statues behind the open east end zone. Hard to beat that pregame backdrop. But here in Seattle at the Kingdom, Seattleites going nuts when Craig hit Daryl Turner to go up by a touchdown. It made me want to run around Seattle in a throwback Kenny Easley jersey with the silver, royal blue, and apple green. Did you rock any jerseys back in the day?
You know, I was a pretty big Seahawks fan, but I was not a jersey wearer. I was known to rock a Sonics jersey from time to time, but yeah, I did not actually own a Kenny Easley or Kurt Warner jersey at that point.
The Kingdom has the gray concrete, but it can make those jerseys pop out even more, maybe. It seemed like a fun place to be on the broadcast for all its faults, and many were pointed out when it was eventually demolished and the new Seahawks Stadium placed directly on the spot. Do you think there's been a growing demand over the years for Seattle's dynamics as a city and how the sports stadiums weave into the urban fabric?
Yeah, I mean, I have good memories of the Kingdom. You know, it's not beautiful by any stretch from the exterior. It's kind of like the ultimate, I guess you would call brutalist stadium, just very undecorated concrete on the outside without much relationship to the surrounding area, which really it was almost all surface parking lot at that point. But on the inside, it got loud. I mean, it was designed almost to be loud. That sound bounced off the concrete everywhere, which was kind of great and a big home field advantage for the Seahawks. Maybe not for the Mariners as much because they didn't draw the crowds generally until like 1995 anyway. But great for sports events. Notoriously terrible for concerts. I believe Led Zeppelin played there. I think the Rolling Stones played there at one point, and it was purportedly just horrendous for musical events. So yeah, I mean there are things about the Kingdom that I miss, but you know I feel like you know the city's done a great job with the kind of the stadium district that they've created with Lumen Field and T-Mobile Park right next door to each other. And they've actually started to fill in some of the surface parking around there. So now you've got some condos and office towers and apartments and a lot more businesses and places to kind of hang out before and after the game than what you did back when the Kingdom was still in existence.
Didn't even make it 25 years. Lead designer Jack Christensen seemed a little miffed, went to the papers and said, hey, this is a feat of engineering and we're just going to throw it away. It took the Parisians a while to come around to the Eiffel Tower, by the way. And
is this what he said? Is this a quote? Eiffel Tower, Kingdom, you know.
It was another engineer quoted in the Seattle Times piece. Yeah, I would direct everyone to Ray's channel, CityNerd on YouTube and Nebula. A lot of great on this topic. I'll link in the show notes. But The Empire Strikes Back. Technically, that's an 80s movie. In very Raider fashion, on a deep strike to James Lofton, Raiders tie it up 7-7. The stadium is still raucous. Seahawks running back Kurt Warner won AFC Offensive Player of the Year his rookie season in '83. Wasn't taking his sweet time in Major League Baseball. And there's no real indication yet the Raiders will run it down their throats for 356 yards tonight. It does not seem to portend that quite yet. Seahawks are getting the ball back, and Dan Deerdorf says in the broadcast, if you're in the Kingdom, if you're the visitor, if you're behind, this is a bad, bad place to have to play a football game. One of those circular concrete relics of the 60s and 70s. What did those get right and wrong about co-location in general, and what happened to them?
Yeah, I mean, well, what happened to them? And there used to be so many, you know, old Busch Stadium, Riverfront Park in Cincinnati. I think Baltimore had a shared multi-purpose stadium. You know, the Metrodome in Minneapolis was a shared stadium. You know, ultimately they were kind of didn't work that well for either. You have this circular configuration. You know, football isn't meant to be played in a circular configuration. It has sidelines. People want to be focused on the 50 and be facing the field. And for baseball, it's a diamond, and people kind of want to be able to face home plate and the pitching mound where the action is, so that they don't really share the same configuration needs at all. And I know I would get an argument from Oakland fans who still, I think, love whatever they're calling Oakland Alameda County Coliseum right now. But I just don't, I just feel like, that their days were always numbered, and, and maybe it begins with the opening of Oriole Park, Camden Yards, where, the Orioles built it's a purpose-built baseball park, which became a huge hit and somewhat replicated in other cities as the years went on. Cleveland, Denver, St. Louis. Most cities went out and built kind of more of an old-fashioned traditional ballpark, and football kind of ended up going the same way too. Every franchise wanted a football specific stadium to play in. And while it's not as efficient in terms of the use of valuable urban real estate as it would be to have baseball and football teams co-locate in the same place, it's just a matter of the configuration doesn't work, and there's just too much money involved in selling expensive seats in a venue that people really want to be at. And so these multi-purpose venues, often with AstroTurf, just aren't really what you see anymore.
Seeing the players fall on the AstroTurf is always kind of jarring compared to what you see with the grass today. And
or even the field turf. Yeah.
Yeah. But Bo Jackson would, after a tough first drive where he fumbled it, now he's feeling it first on the ground. And then in pass route, Bo shakes a safety on this NFL All-80s team in Kenny Easley before sliding under that outfield looper from Mark Wilson, 14-7 Raiders. How extraordinary was Bo, and is there a modern comparison for what he's doing and how he's capturing the imagination?
Yeah, he's such an interesting guy and an interesting, amazing, phenomenal athlete. And I just don't think he won't ever be forgotten. I mean, people who don't know anything about football, they know that name. And it's just very interesting because he was probably better known as a college football player than as a college baseball player at Auburn in Alabama. But coming out of college, he really wanted to focus on baseball. He signed with the Royals. I think he came out of school in '85, signed with the Royals in '86. Really didn't want to play football. And then ultimately, I think the Raiders drafted him in the '87 draft, even though he had said, I don't want to play football. They drafted him. And Al Davis, the owner, said, you know what? You can prioritize baseball. Just come on over when you're done with baseball season. And I think that was something Bo hadn't really considered. He didn't think an NFL team would be okay with him doing that. So he went for it, which, I think is a mixed thing. We got to see him play some great football, obviously, which I think we'll talk about more in this game. But, in the end, maybe it would have been better for him personally and professionally to just keep playing baseball. He was so good at both, but I think we probably want to get to a couple more of the plays in this game before I talk more about that.
He'll make a couple more plays.
Yeah.
That touchdown by Bo, though, sliding catch, it was sandwiched by 2-3 and out drives for the Seahawks. And so they're down 14-7. But Steve Largent does extend his catch streak to an NFL record of 148 games, held every major receiving record until Jerry Rice got about halfway through his career, well before he finished out with the Seahawks and Raiders. Before the Raiders left Oakland Alameda Coliseum for the second time, this time to Vegas. You've opined on the state of transit-oriented development in Vegas and made some on-location videos when you lived there last year. How does Allegiant Stadium compare to the previous Raiders homes?
Oh, gosh. I mean, because we have to go back to... So, yeah, I'm just not a huge fan of Oakland Alameda Coliseum. I know that there's transit access there. You can get there on the BART, but it's one of these places that's just surrounded by an enormous moat of parking. And at one point, it was kind of shared with... don't know, was it Oracle Arena at that point where, the Golden State Warriors won championships there. But then the Warriors even went to San Francisco. So now it's just the A's the last couple of years. So not a huge fan of that stadium setup. LA Memorial Coliseum, pretty good. I mean, fine. And then Allegiant, I have not been to an event at Allegiant. It's it's an extremely conspicuous stadium because it's all black. And it's right there kind of hovering over you as you come up I-15 into Vegas. I actually lived, it was kind of fun. I lived pretty close to the Raiders practice facility in Henderson, Nevada, which is also basically an all black, kind of like a Death Star looking building. And if you kind of go up close to it, I think there's like some sort of eternal flame torch, and like there's probably like a statue of Al Davis or something in commitment to excellence. But Allegiant, it's Vegas. Vegas doesn't really have a lot in the way of a transit system. It's a place that probably should have some sort of L or subway running up the strip because there's so much demand for travel between the airport and downtown and all of the enormous resorts in between. And Allegiant is situated a little bit off that. It's probably a couple blocks west of I-15, which is a couple blocks west of the strip, but it's still walkable from like the Mandalay Bay. In fact, there's even like a signed walkway like to Allegiant Stadium from Mandalay Bay, which is kind of at the south end of the strip. So it's not completely inaccessible from all the places you would probably go if you were in Vegas. And it's kind of notorious for being for drawing a lot of out-of-town fans. Like, people love to come to Vegas to watch their team. So like if the Broncos are in town or something like that, there'll be a ton of Denver fans in town because, it's a good excuse to come to Vegas.
I also urge folks to check out Ray's great on-location vignettes. He's no longer in Vegas, moving from town to town. Love the one in Montreal, which will be only a few days old when this episode comes out. And back from Quebec to the Pacific Northwest, the Seahawks are forced to punt again and actually do a good job of pinning the Raiders down inside their own 10. So you could play field position. That is, if this wasn't just giving Bo more space to pick up straight line speed. Beats Brian Bosworth to the edge, who was talking about how they were going to contain him. He was, even from the first game of his rookie year that season on the NBC broadcast, Dick Enberg said, he's a legend in his own mind. Got in the media talking about how they'd stop Bo before this game. Well, Bo beats Bosworth to the edge. More Raiders, and he's off to the tunnel. Once Bo's running down the sideline, the rest of the defense are outside the squared television frame. The camera would pan to catch Bo taking it all the way into the tunnel. After a decade of not seeing the Seahawks run out of that tunnel for any playoff games, LA would then nearly take the team in the mid-90s. Microsoft's Paul Allen bought the Seahawks and surveyed his options after the Raiders returned to Oakland in 95. Seattle approves the new stadium and Seahawks stay put. Is there a chain of events where, say, Bo isn't running through that tunnel on Monday Night Football, and the Kingdom hosts some great playoff memories in 87, that maybe the Kingdom isn't rubble by the year 2000?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the Kingdom was destined for the rebel pile, and unfortunately, a lot of the highlights in the Kingdom, the most memorable ones, are often from the visiting team. And in this case, I mean, it's an all-time highlight, I think, for NFL fans generally, and low light for Seahawks fans, because Bo was he was a big, strong running back, but he had so much flat out speed when he got up to his peak velocity, and he just runs right by Seattle secondary players. I mean, it was just jaw dropping. And so him running into the tunnel is almost like, because of the size he was and how fast, like the speed he got up to, he almost needed all that extra runway just to decelerate from what he had just done to the Seahawks. And so that was a pretty tough moment, I think, for Seahawks fans. And, as far as the Seahawks fortunes, after this game, it's probably determined a little bit more by, I think at this point, the Broncos are probably have the upper hand on the Seahawks anyway. So I don't know if there's really a scenario where the Seahawks have too much more success than what they did have, which isn't a lot until really like Pete Carroll enters the picture in 2010 or so. So yeah, I think for a lot of reasons, the Kingdom is already destined for the wrecking ball. I think it really starts with the tiles falling from the ceiling during the '95 Mariners season, I think, where they actually had to play a bunch of their games on the road, their home games on the road, because they could not play in the Kingdom at all. So, the writing was kind of on the wall at that point.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
There's still a part of this 1987 action movie where Bo and the Boz square off. Bosworth also burned on that long run, but it would actually be several indignities into the night for Seattle before that happens. Among an era of indignities at the hands of Los Angeles, mentioned the AFC title in January '84, and that later that year, the Coliseum would also host the Summer Olympics. The '94 World Cup comes to the States, and the Rose Bowl out in Pasadena got the final. Brazil, Italy, 3-2 penalty kicks. Seattle wasn't thrown not one bone. Couldn't get a group stage match. But hey, for 2026, Seattle has graduated to a World Cup town. How well is their infrastructure set up for this compared to the past?
Yeah. Oh, very well, I think. I actually got to go to, I think they had the Copa America, which is typically just the teams from the South American nations, but I believe in 2016, I think. They expanded the Copa America to include like the USA, Mexico, like Panama, Haiti, I think 6 extra North American and Caribbean teams, and they actually played it at stadiums in the US. So I actually got I think I got like a bundle where I was able to go see all the games at, and it might have been Quest Field at that point, but Lumen Field now. So, I got to see, I think I got to see Argentina play Haiti. So I got to see Messi play. I got to see the U.S. team play. And, Seattle's a very good soccer town. The Sounders do very well there. The OL Reign, the women's team, do really well there as well. So it's gonna be a great place for World Cup games, and it's close into downtown, so that's great for people visit from all over the world to come to that event. And so that's gonna be a great venue for people to spend time in the center of the city and go out and shop and eat and be able to, you can walk to Lumen Field from downtown, or you can take the Link light rail train too. So I think they're set up really well for that. But yeah, the Kingdom, not so much. I actually did see the old NASL Sounders play at the Kingdom at one point. And that's just not, soccer has very different demands for, you can't really play it. I mean, good players will just flat out refuse to play it on field turf. There's too much chance of injury. The ball doesn't do what it's supposed to do. You can't make the same moves on the field as you can on an actual turf pitch. So we'll see. But yeah, my expectations are pretty high for that World Cup.
It's something to look forward to. The Kingdom did get Final Fours back in the 80s, early 90s, and the NBA All-Star game there in 87. But for that game, 3 Lakers were initially selected and no Sonics. Lakers coach Pat Riley had to add Tom Chambers as an injury replacement to put some respect on Seattle's name as the host city. Tom Chambers, All-Star Game MVP. And the Sonics had to play all over town in the 80s. Only NBA team to play following a rain delay. Got kind of slippery from the sounds of it, from reports from that day. A little dangerous. How well has Seattle pulled off home games for various sports when venues were under construction, renovation, scheduling conflicts? And is this sort of load sharing an indicator of how equipped a city is to host major international sporting events?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to ask, but Seattle and Tacoma have always had pretty good redundancy in sports venues, which has come in handy, I think, when well, I mean, so the Sonics often relied on what was originally Seattle Center Coliseum, and then later renamed Key Arena, and now it's Climate Pledge Arena, where the Kraken play, the NHL expansion team. You know, that Sonics team in '87 was actually quite a bit of fun. I believe, and that was always my franchise. I was always kind of first and foremost a Sonics fan. Tom Chambers, Xavier McDaniel, and Dale Ellis, I think, all averaged like over 22 points in that 1987 season, which is pretty remarkable. I mean, it was kind of a high scoring era, I think, in NBA history. But yeah, the idea that they only were able to have one all-star, and even then as a replacement, is kind of funny. If I remember right, Tom Chambers also participated in the dunk contest. I don't think he won it. But,
yeah, I think MJ won.
But was that? Did he win? I can't even remember.
I think MJ won. But that's a tough matchup for Tom.
It's a tough era. I think probably Dominique Wilkins was probably still pretty good at that point too, I would think. Yeah. So, but as far as the venues, the Sonics had periods. I think even in their first season, there was a second arena at Seattle Center, which I think it was just called the Arena at one point, and later it was called Mercer Arena, and I don't think it exists anymore. That was like a 8,000 or 9,000 seat venue, and I think they played a few games there, and then they played at the Kingdom, I think from their championship season in '79 to '84 or '85, I think, and the Coliseum underwent a renovation then. It underwent another renovation when they transformed it into Key Arena in the early 90s, I think. And so the Sonics they went down to Tacoma and they played their home games at the Tacoma Dome, which is kind of a weird hybrid. It's good for basketball. It's a little cavernous, I think. But yeah, so they played there as well. And then the Seahawks, when the Kingdom was being demolished and they were building the new stadium, they were able to go use Husky Stadium up at the university north of the Ship Canal. So there's always been kind of this redundancy in Seattle sports venues that's allowed for these disruptions to occur.
The Sonics get the title in '79. The Lakers stopped the repeat in '80 in the Western Conference Finals, and the Sonics wouldn't get another title and taking off for Oklahoma City. Your videos on transit-oriented sports venues tend to feature high marks for Seattle venues. Is Seattle, do they at least get over the hump, the Western Conference champs of sports urbanism?
Well, it depends what you call the Western Conference. I kind of like Vancouver, BC's setup, even though we can't talk about like an NFL team or a Major League Baseball team or the NBA anymore, although the Grizzlies did. But they're pretty well set up for their MLS and CFL teams. The BC Lions play in, what is it? I forget what the names of all these are. Is it the Rogers Center? It's kind of their domed stadium, which they've renovated recently, and then the Canucks of the NHL also play, I think, a block away from there, and it's extremely well integrated into downtown, and well connected to their excellent SkyTrain system there. So I do like Vancouver a lot. I don't know if I would give Seattle the nod over Vancouver, but Seattle is always they've always located their sports venues centrally. The Kingdome was right down in Pioneer Square, and then when they demolished it, they put the baseball and football stadiums there too. And then the Sonics and now the Kraken have always played at Seattle Center, which is kind of on the north side of the central area. It's almost necessitated by kind of the geography of Seattle. It's an interesting city in that it's located on an isthmus, and then some of the more affluent suburbs are across a big lake with floating bridges on it. So you don't want to test the traffic too much. If you can, you probably don't want to try to send everybody out to the suburbs and then bring them back. You probably want to have things as central as possible to avoid kind of the transportation capacity bottlenecks that are sort of inherent in the way Seattle's geography is set up.
LA, a little different geography there. Yeah, this is supposed to be Seattle's moment at home, but in Al Michaels' halftime package, he's going out to Raiders practice. Like they knew it wasn't going to be Seattle's time yet. Not to view LA as the enemy on the West Coast. We're all brothers in high-speed intercity rail someday, at least when a new DOT map drops. San Diego to Vancouver, baby. And likewise on your channel, you produce content for our intercity rail fantasies from time to time. What major American sports cities would benefit the most from finally being linked by high-speed passenger rail?
Any of these cities where you have kind of built-in rivalries, where the cities are close enough to that you could get between them. You could probably drive it in 3 hours or 4 hours, kind of thing. But it's really, I don't know, it's really a distance you don't want to fly because it's kind of ridiculous. So there are definitely links where it would really make sense to have a rail connection where you could kind of party on the train. And kind of pregame on your way. I think Dallas and Houston makes a lot of sense because they're maybe not in the NFL as much, but they're NBA rivals. They're Texas and the Astros and the Rangers play in the same division in Major League Baseball, so that would be great as far as kind of sports road tripping. In England, in the Premier League, the train is kind of how you get to those away matches, right? And it would be cool to have, the U.S. is bigger, obviously, but you definitely have pairs of cities in the U.S. where that would make a lot of sense. I would think, L.A. to Vegas, especially as Vegas apparently keeps adding professional sports teams. I think that makes a lot of sense, not just for the sports rivalries like the Chargers and the Raiders, or the Kings and the Golden Knights or whatever, but just for pure tourism, like the number of people who drive or fly from LA to Las Vegas for weekends. That one just makes a whole lot of sense to me.
In Michael's entertaining halftime package, we get a feel for how our SoCal Kings of the 80s had gotten so down bad in 87. Marcus Allen lamented, quote, "We needed a little problem here and a problem there, keep everybody loose." You got some fun shots from the production of guys like Ted Hendricks, Lyle Alzado, John Matuzak. The cover of Matuzak's autobiography, Cruising with Twos, released that year, actually had a similarly macho 80s cinema aesthetic to the Boz poster you sent me. Did it feel at the time like the Boz could give Seattle that edge and attitude they needed to get over the hump, the kind LA teams possessed?
Yeah. I mean, in retrospect, I feel like I probably had a little more skepticism about it. But I think in reality, all of us, because me and all my friends were big into the Seahawks, particularly starting in '83 when they started to really show signs of life. And, even though the team was coming off a couple seasons without a playoff appearance, they were still, again, 500 or better. So you always had pretty... you always still felt fairly optimistic for the next year. And then, in '87, so what happened? I had to actually go back and look. It's like, how did they end up with Bosworth? Because he was such a big college star, and he had forgone draft, I think, because he did not want to get drafted by, what was it, the Indianapolis Colts, I think, who were just dreadful in that period. And so he went into the supplemental draft. I'm not sure how Seattle lucked into getting the first pick in the supplemental draft, but they did. They won that lottery or whatever. I remember winning the lottery and all of us thinking, we're going to get Brian Bosworth. We might go to the Super Bowl. That's how it felt. You felt like this was a guy, because in college, I think he had won 2 Butkus Awards, the linebacker of the year, back to back before coming out of the University of Oklahoma. And he was all over ESPN, every Saturday, right? Making huge plays. He was very outgoing. He took his helmet off. He had like a mohawk or whatever. He had this very 80s kind of, if you remember like Jim McMahon with the Bears, it's the same kind of thing, just very brash, very outspoken. You knew he was going to look good on TV. You knew he was going to get all kinds of advertising deals, but you also felt like, yeah, he's a really good athlete. He seems like a guy who has a ton of leadership quality for whatever that's worth. And so you did feel like he was somebody who maybe he's not going to carry us to the Super Bowl, but he could be. You felt like he really could be a big missing piece of putting the Seahawks on that next level.
Bo also had an interesting path. Bucks actually drafted him first overall in 86, and he's like, nope, not going. He sleeps through the 87 draft, and Raiders are able to get him in the 7th round and pay him a ton and say, hey, come by whenever you want. So that worked out pretty well for Bo.
Yeah. And I hope you put this Land of Boz poster in your show notes, because it was kind of legendary that rookie season. That was just part of the hype package, I think, for the Boz was, back in the 80s, people used to put posters of sports stars up on their wall, Michael Jordan, obviously, but, that was what you did. You had these wall posters that you put up. And so, they came out with this poster, and it was the Land of Boz. So it was a play on the Wizard of Oz, which is partly, I think, Seattle. I don't know if it too often goes by this nickname, but there are times when it's called the Emerald City for whatever, just because of how green it is, I think, because of all the rain, honestly. But the poster has him with this kind of like Dorothy, who I think was actually like a Playboy playmate, if I remember. So it's this kind of sexualized Dorothy, and then Boz in like a cut-off football jersey, and kind of trampling over the remains of something that kind of looks like a raider, like a Wicked Witch of the West Raiders person, and like somebody with like kind of like an orange helmet with a 7 on it, who I think is supposed to be John Elway, and then somebody who looks like they're in a Chiefs uniform. So Bosworth really lording it over all of the Seahawks hated rivals, which you can't actually use, I think, the actual NFL uniforms because of copyright, but they try to present it that way as much as possible, and just extremely over the top and corny poster. But I think at that point we were all kind of bought into it. It's like, whatever, this can be the guy, let's just go along with it.
The dog and it seemed like a pretend family too. And
the little Boskins or whatever it is. Yeah.
And it seemed like multiple movie symbols being mixed in there. Wizard of Oz, but also it could be a poster for Back to the Future or an action movie mixed in one.
Oh yeah, and that was a big deal back then too, because part of the Raiders-Seahawks rivalry was, I remember it was either like towels or signs that they would bring out, and this is particularly in 83 and 84 when the rivalry really heated up. But it was I think it was Raiders Busters, and so it was a play on Ghostbusters with the little circle with the slash through it, except instead of being a ghost, it was like a Raiders helmet or whatever, or a Raiders logo with a slash through it. And there was a sign that says Raiders Busters. I don't know. In retrospect, extremely, extremely corny, but it was just one of those things that made sense at the time and everybody bought into it.
Pure 1987 distilled for historians like us here. The Seahawks seemed like they might be finding their edge, their attitude, and Bo Jackson would put an end to that. Raiders get the ball coming out of the half, 27-7, Bo glides for 42 yards to get LA once again in scoring position. 3rd and goal from the 2. Jackson catches the toss and seems like he may take it outside again. Nope. Cuts downhill right through Boz and into the end zone. Literally tells him to bring bus fare next time. And perhaps in defiance, Seattle would finally start pushing for more passenger rail development after that, the superior mode. How else did the Boz quake reverberate on the ground in the Seattle sports scene? And was this rock bottom, or were there more candidates for the nadir as Seattle climbed out of LA's shadow over the coming decades?
Yeah, I mean, this was at least one of the nadirs. I mean, what happens here is, to his credit, Brian Bosworth actually gets to the place that he needs to get to fill that gap and wrap Bo Jackson up. And I think he's got, I don't know, like if the stats are right, he's got like 20 pounds on Bo Jackson. And what you would see these days, I think, in that situation where the running back cuts it back inside, is if they get one-on-one with a linebacker, they're going to put like a little juke on or some sort of move and try to wrong foot the linebacker and just go around them. And it may work or it may not. Instead, Bo Jackson just kind of puts his shoulder down and just goes right through him. And I don't know. It's just it's again, it's kind of a testament to, because he's already displayed his speed in the game on the 90 yard touchdown run or whatever. But this also, it just kind of shows his power and his explosiveness to just kind of launch his shoulder into this linebacker and Bosworth was a good athlete, but Bo Jackson just bowls him over and tramples him into the end zone just one-on-one. And so that's kind of the humiliation. And the sense I always got was, growing up in Seattle, it's a very nice place. It's a very polite place. It's somewhat passive. If you drive around Seattle, the joke is always like, if you come to a 4-way stop, like nobody will go because everybody's waiting for the other person to go. So it's kind of that attitude. And you had hoped that, that particularly football, it just requires a lot more aggressiveness and kind of swagger. And you were hoping Bosworth brought that to the Seahawks. And, it just became clear, if it wasn't clear at other points, it was clear in this game that LA still had one up on Seattle, just in a more general way. There were other nadirs in Seattle sports. The Sonics, having the best record in the NBA, but losing in the first round to the Denver Nuggets, with Dikembe Mutombo famously clutching the ball on the and rolling around on the floor in Key Arena after winning Game 5. That might be rock bottom as well. Although the Sonics come back and they don't win a championship, but they give the Bulls a good run. The 72 win Bulls a good run. There's always this question in the background of, is it just a matter of Seattle doesn't have the swagger they need? And I think over the years that, Seattle kind of rises from this in some ways. It becomes a tech hub. Microsoft becomes synonymous with home computing. Later on, there's Amazon. The Seattle music scene really takes hold in the early 90s, at a time where like hard rock music was often dominated by LA bands like, Guns N' Roses or like Rat or Quiet Riot or something like that. So Seattle starts getting a little bit of a leg up and a little bit of an attitude. And I always feel like this moment in the 2010 playoffs where Marshawn Lynch runs through like 8 of the New Orleans Saints on the way to carrying what I think was like a 7-9 Seahawks team in Pete Carroll's first year, just running over another team and then jumping into the end zone backwards while he's like holding his crotch, I think. Yeah. And then just I believe that the local seismographs actually record a small earthquake because the assembled crowd at Quest Field just explodes at this. And I just feel like that was the first time I feel like Seattle sports fans had ever seen someone represent their city and just with complete dominance and swagger. Later on they go on to win a Super Bowl, still with Pete Carroll, still with Marshawn Lynch. So that's a great moment. I don't want to overlook, how good some of the Mariners teams were in the mid '90s and how great like the Sean Kemp, Gary Payton connection was. And Sean Kemp had his moments of dominance and swagger as well. But it's really that moment with Marshawn Lynch that I always feel like that's the moment where Seattle finally feels like it's confident in its own place, and it doesn't define itself relative to Los Angeles particularly, but even like San Francisco, that it feels confident that it stands on its own merits as a great American city.
This has been another episode of Remember That Game. Please rate, review, subscribe, and check out more episodes.
When you buy Kroger brand products, you feel like you're winning. That's because they offer proven quality at lower than low prices. In fact, we guarantee that you and your family will love how Kroger brand products taste, or you get your money back. So next time you're shopping for the family, look for delicious Kroger brand products, because they'll make you all feel like you're winning. Shop now, in-store, or online. Bakers, fresh for everyone.